I built this car. I was living in the mountains behind Santa Fe, New Mexico. My shop was at 8,500 feet above sea level. Santa Fe is 7,500 feet above sea level. So I went with a pretty conservative cam. I started out with a Comp Cam's 282S, a solid lifter cam, and that worked out okay until I moved to Florida not long afterwards. And down at sea level, the car needed more cam. So I moved up to a Comp 294S, another flat tappet cam, and I like that cam a lot better. And I ran that for a while, and then I wanted to move up to a solid roller. So I moved up to a Comp 288AR solid roller. Great street roller, runs on light spring pressure, great all-around power. The mistake I made was I bought a set of Crane drop-in solid roller lifters for the dog bone. This block, the late model GM blocks all have dog bone lifter setups, and those lifters were far from robust. That 288 AR Comp Cam I replaced with a 502 AI, I think it was, Lunati solid roller cam, but the Lunati solid roller cam turned out to be a piece of junk. It was induction hardened. They hardened it by blowing hot air on the core, and it wasn't hard enough, and the hardening on the cam came off. I'll show you some pictures of what that started to look like. And I had that cam polished, and I changed lifters, and this was before we figured out that it was the hardening on the cam. But eventually I scrapped that and went to Crane and talked to them about a core. And Crane has 8620 hardened, furnace hardened cores that have a cast distributor gear on it, so you can just run your regular distributor with them. It's the cam that has that copper color between the lobes on it. That's the right hardened cam that you're looking for, whether it's from Crane or from Bullet, whoever, you want the right combination. So I started out with that Crane cam, a similar profile to what the Lunati had, because I liked the way the Lunati ran. It's just that it didn't run long enough. And I moved into a cam that was 636 lift on the intake and the exhaust, and I think it was 240, 248, something like that. And the duration, I'll post a card here, you can look at it. And that ran all right, but I figured out that it could handle a little bit more lift. And at this point, I'd been through the motor. I'd punched the motor 30 over, and I put a different set of pistons in it that had a little bit higher dome on it, and I switched out to a set of Brodix Race Right oval port heads. So now the motor is really making 1075 to 1 compression, and it wanted a little bit more lift on it. So I went to a intake with 670 thousandths lift, but stayed at 636 on the lift for the exhaust. The idea being, if I gave it a little bit more duration on the exhaust, I could get the same exhaust flow, but with less lift, the exhaust would have to be moving faster. So that was the key, is to speed up the exhaust, because as the exhaust is speeded up, when the exhaust rushes out of the cylinder, it's pulling the intake charge into the cylinder. So this cam has worked out really well, and I'm sticking with this. I'm still running the BAM lifters. I run a pack, I think it's 1227 valve spring that I'm running at 200 pounds on the seat and 500 pounds open. And that's a good combination. It works well for me. I had to modify those BAM lifters a little bit, to get it to oil right on the top end. It's a tiny little notch that you cut between the push rod port and the main oil supply. I'll show it to you here on the lifter. And I have to be real careful with that notch. It's real small. You can't just go in there with a Dremel and grind it in. You have to just barely touch it. In fact, somebody told me that using a decent engraving pen is even better. But a little bit of a notch there will give you just the right amount of oil to the valve springs at idle. I cut open a set of valve covers so I could run the engine with an open valve cover and see how much oil I was getting on the top end, and that worked out really fine. I just laid this valve cover down, but you get the idea here. It's just an old Moroso cover that cut a little notch, and you're able to bend the top back enough so you can look down inside and see the valve springs and the rocker tips, see how everything's oiling, see how everything's moving. A handy little deal to have a valve cover like that one. Here's a way to hold the primer in place and be able to prime the engine and watch how the oil comes around to the lifters and in the valley. So you leave the intake manifold off and you just use a little piece of intake manifold like this one here, bolt it down on the back, and then you can run your primer down and put a drill on it and let it run, and you can watch everything the way it oils. Watch the oil down in the lifters, watch as you roll it around and see how it comes up the push rods. You need to understand how things flow. That's what I got coming out of the bottom end.